Well, good afternoon again, everybody. This session, we have finally got to Seamus Heaney, and it's just extraordinary to be here, as it always is. I have four wonderful poets. Alas, Gerard couldn't come at the last minute, and so we've lost our Irish speaker. But first of all, we have Eric Ngalle. Charles is a Cameroon writer. He's based in Wales. He also writes plays, and he's going to read, I think, from your autobiography. Is that part of a little bit of it? Then we have Francis. Francis is something that's come up here a lot this afternoon is translation, the sense of making some bridge between other people and other languages and other poetries. And he translates from Bosnian. I asked him as we were coming, how did that come about? And he said, well, I got to Cambridge and I didn't, I thought, well, I'll do German, but there are all these other wonderful languages. And of course that led him, as soon as you learn another language, you enter another world. So I'm looking forward to hearing about this. And then finally we have Sudeep Sen, who needs really no introduction to the Indians here, and he's already been talking to us. He's from Bengal. He's won a lot of prize-winning books, edited, done translations. He lives both in India and in Britain. Is that right, Sudeep? Really? Mostly Delhi. And he's just got a new book, so he can wave it. And and all of them will be signing books afterwards. So I thought I wanted to call this Vowels Ploughed into Other because I'm thinking of his book, Seamus's book, Fieldwork, and we are among the fields, the home fields. And landscape is language, and his sense of vowels is immaculate. And I think he thought of vowels as the cohesive, elemental and rather emotional side of poetry. A consonant is all very well. You need consonants. There's nothing wrong with consonants. But they chop things up, their edges. You can't sing a consonant. You can't hold a note on a consonant. But the vowels are what sing in the language. And I thought this idea of vowels ploughed into other speaks to the coalescence of languages and poetries that this festival, the spirit of this festival, is all about. So what I have asked them to do is to each read a poem by Heaney that speaks to them, a short poem, and then something that a work of their own, a poem of their own. It might be in response, or they might feel in some way that it relates to their sense of Seamus Heaney. Eric.
Thank you very much. I'm actually quite nervous. I was standing outside Lyric Theatre the other day, and one of the organizers came to me and said, Eric, you look very pensive. I said, no, I wasn't pensive. I was just looking back to how far one has come. Before I read the poem that I chose from Seamus Heaney, I have to try and put it into context. As a 17-year-old boy, I left my village at such haste. When I turned 17, effectively, for the second time, my father died. But my father's family disowned me. And to protect me from what my mother saw was witchcraft that were coming from my father's family, my mother abandoned me into the hands of a witchcraft practitioner. So in the middle of the night, this guy would take me into a children's cemetery. And if you look at my body, at all my joints, I have 7 marks. Things got so bad. Eventually, we lost the case. I lost the house. But I saw people mocking my mother. And seeing one's mother cry is never a good sign. So when I received an email from Ruth about Seamus Heaney, he wasn't one of the poets that Colonial Wings brought to Cameroon. So I wasn't very familiar with his work. And I was at the Hay Festival at the time. But 2 weeks ago, I opened his book, and this poem jumped out. Now, before I read this poem, I just have to tell you my state of mind as a 17-year-old boy in May 1997. Are those not my sisters I see? Are those not my brothers I see? I am hell-bound. Of that I am certain. Yesterday you loved me. Today your faces mask so much disdain, so much hatred. How long have you been planning this? Did we not fish in the streams of Moray? Did we not fetch water there? You see, I do not care for the voices of my ancestors to rescue me. I am hell-bound. Of that I am certain. As I stood over there, a can of petrol in one hand, a box of matches in the other hand, looking at my father's house with deadly eyes, madness in my heart, murderous intentions in my soul. Even the night was silent, as if it were holding its breath. Even the moon could not bear to watch as it hid behind angry clouds, the likes of which seldom trouble African skies. But as I stepped forward to set the wheels in motion that will carry me into damnation, I could hear my mother's voice piercing through the cloud. My mother's voice caressed my soul. My mother cried in the voices of my ancestors and those before her. My mother cried, Agbe wolo atimbangundu, Agbe wolo atimbangundu, weye oma weya weyanje, weya oma mo kakangwema. I turned around and walked towards home, but there was no new horizon seeping through the dark clouds. My mother's voice may have halted my actions on that day. But I, Motimbili, the one who comes and goes, I, Yomandene, the giant who protects the mountain, the guardian, the mountain where my grandmother went after her death, a mountain of broken heart. I, Ekule Kule, I, Eric Ngalle Charles, I will have my revenge in this life and not wait for the next. So I thought. Eventually, I became a victim of human trafficking. And instead of going to Belgium as a student, I ended up in Russia, where I spent 2 years and 2 months. Don't ask me how, but I left Russia as a 62-year-old Zimbabwean. I was traveling from Moscow, Heathrow, Johannesburg, Harare, because I was a Zimbabwean. But when I arrived at Heathrow, I thought to myself, flipping, I'm not going to Bulawayo, you know. And, but how do I convince the British authorities that I wasn't a 62-year-old Zimbabwean? Things got from, you know. Anyway, so I came across this poem, Shemus, and it's from The Cure of Troy. Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem or play can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then, once in a lifetime, the long-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a farther shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. Call miracles self-healing, the author self-revealing, double take of feeling. If there is fire on the mountain and lightning and storm, and God speaks from the sky, that means someone is hearing the outcry and the birth cry of a new life at its stem. It means once in a lifetime that justice can rise and hope and history can rhyme. And I saw this poem and I thought, if someone reads my memoir, they'll assume I had read this poem, because each stanza speaks directly to me. Because I saw ants and maggots making merry with my blood in a child's cemetery in the middle of the night. Now, this is not what worried me the most. I was thinking, in Cameroon, we have rhinoceros vipers, we have black mambas, and this is a charlatan invoking gods of my ancestors, ants and maggots making merry. I could die here, my mother wouldn't be the wiser. So this is my response to this poem. And again, one of my first language is Bakweri. My ancestors are Bantu. So when I speak Bakweri, I go back to the music of my rains and my broken landscape. So this poem is called Warning to a Stubborn Child. Mama mawelo njia nenjia lene. Tata mawelo njia nenjia lene. Wamanuka tomoli mekoli koli ribe yawu. Rina muko moli mekoli koli rina gbe yawu. Rina ene juju kena mevembe wane ya enere ya maungo. My mother warned me. My father warned me. They said, when you reach the top of the hill, do not sigh. Do not show any signs of tiredness. On top of the hill, I sighed. I took deep breath. I was tired. That is when I saw Jukuke, the devil, and his friend Mevumba. They took me away. Yes, I was tired. I was weak. I was a boy. My bones were soft. The judge banged his gavel and shouted, Mankama, Mankama, exile, exile. Do you mean exile as in the case of the Molikilikili, the stick insect who died and resurrected herself from death to question the grave diggers and the mourners why she wasn't washed and why she was buried in dirty clothes? Or do you mean exile as in Mowbray, Sir Thomas Mowbray, in King Richard II, Act 1, Scene 2. Alas, the part I had in Woodstock's blood doth more solicits me than your exclaims, to stir against the butchers of his life. But since correction lies in those hands which made the fourth, place we our quarrels in the wheels of heaven, whom when they see the hours ripe on earth, will rain hot vengeance on the offender's head. Or do you mean exile, as in crossing seas, climbing mountains, seeking peace, and finding none? In my sleep, I saw my grandmother. She was rearranging the flowers on my grave. She rewrote the words on my epitaph. Ngalle was here. Ngalle is no more. I saw young boys and girls dancing barefoot in the rain. I saw bees pregnant with nectar, carrying me home, away from exile. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll go up. You start, and I'll go up.
So thanks very much, Eric, for a marvellous reading there. I'd also like to thank the organisers of the festival and this day for the privilege of being here, and especially to be able to celebrate Seamus Heaney. Now, I'm a poetry translator, so I'd like to celebrate his work as a translator specifically, but also look perhaps at the interplay between his translation and his poetry. Seamus Heaney was one of the great translators. He translated from Irish, Latin, Ancient Greek, and Old English. And I'd like to read a little bit from his translation of Beowulf from the Old English. And what appeals to me as a translator isn't just the way that Heaney carries the force of the story, but how it's in a poetic line that recreates the Old English alliterative verse, but without staying enslaved to it. So it's also a modern line. I'd like to just read a piece right from the beginning when Beowulf and his companions in the land of the Geats have heard of trouble across the sea in Denmark. The monster Grendel has been ravaging Hrothgar's hall. And yeah, it's the sea voyage. Nobody tried to keep him from going. No elder denied him, dear as he was to them. Instead, they inspected omens and spurred his ambition to go, whilst he moved about, while the leader he was, enlisting men, the best he could find. With 14 others, the warrior boarded the boat as captain, a canny pilot among coasts and currents. Time went by. The boat was on water, in close under the cliffs. Men climbed eagerly up the gangplank. Sand churned in surf. Warriors loaded a cargo of weapons, shining war gear in the vessel's hold. Then heaved out, away with a will in their wood-wreathed ship. Over the waves with the wind behind her and foam at her neck, she flew like a bird until her curved prow had covered the distance. And on the following day, at the due hour, those seafarers sighted land, sunlit cliffs, sheer crags, and looming headlands, the landfall they sought. It was the end of their voyage, and the Geats vaulted over the side, out onto the sand, and moored their ship. There was a clash of mail and a thresh of gear. They thanked God for that easy crossing on a calm sea. I think I mentioned that Heaney's translations also very much inform his verse, say his translations of Virgil, you see in his own poetry, but also the Old English echoes. And a poem I'd like to read in a minute has echoes of this Old English. And I was thinking especially of echoes that come in Heaney's poem Bone Dreams. It's sort of long, a multi-part poem. And he talks about his discovery of Barnhus, bone house, as a wonderful kenning for the body and the soul inside. And yeah, if I can just quote briefly from Bone Dreams, he writes about this discovery. In the coffered riches of grammar and declensions, I found Barnhus, its fire, benches, wattle and rafters, where the soul fluttered a while in the roof space. And this, for me, it reminded me very much of a translation I had the privilege to do. It took me 20 years, of the master poet Mac Dizdar, one of the great, well, probably the greatest 20th century poet of Bosnia. He was writing in the 60s. He lived through the ravages of the Second World War and the Nazi occupation. He was in the communist underground. And Stone Sleeper is addressing the medieval heretics of Bosnia. These heretics, there was a Manichaean religion that, a sort of variant of Christianity, if you like, that believed that the world and the body were made by the devil, but at people's heart there was a spark of divine fire, and that divine fire was their salvation. So in Stone Sleeper, he's addressing the sleepers who are waiting for Judgment Day under the carved stones, when they'll be reunited with the Godhead of fire and light. There's a couple of references to two themes from these carved tombstones. On a few of them, there's a soldier in a kilt with a vast upraised right hand, and nobody knows what that means. Sometimes the soldier has a sun for a head. perhaps something Mithraic, I don't know. On other ones, there are lines of women dancing the kolo, the South Slav round dance, which anybody who's been there will probably have seen it danced to Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia. So I'd like to just read this poem. It's called A Word on Man, where Dizdar is speaking to the sleepers under the stone. And yeah, there are echoes of Barnhus here. Born in a body, barred in with veins, dreaming that 7 heavens descend, barred in a heart, bound into brains, dreaming the sun in dark without end, bound in your skin, ground into bones, where is the bridge to heaven's thrones? Barred in a rib cage of silver your chains, be ye so mighty, no whiter than surf, born in a body, barred in with veins, dreaming a union of heaven and earth, cast out of heaven, you thirst wine and bread, when will your home be your homeland instead? Barred in with bones, woven in flesh, soon will your bones poke through this mesh. Cast out of heaven, you crave wine and bread, stone and smoke's all you get inside instead. I see your one hand, but where is the other? Was it lifted to kill its brother? Barred in a heart, bound in a brain, black your cave, the sun you crave. Dreaming of heaven, near once again, your body it weaves, drunken through leaves. Bound into blood, eaten by roots, in this hollow of sorrow, do you lead or follow? In this hollow of sorrow, not leader, not led, you're a tavern of carrion, a maggot's bed. Robbed from its body, the tomb acts alone. But when will this body be an act of its own?
I'm glad Brother Eric is back. So this is extremely emotional for me for various reasons. I also finally met another part of the Heaney family. I met the 2 brothers. As a young student in America, the man you're celebrating was a mentor. So when his brother asked me which poem you've chosen, so I said, I have so many favorites, and I have a short list. He said, no, give me one. And I said, it's Mossborn, 2 poems in dedication, and I'm going to read the first one, Sunlight. And he said, that's my favorite. And he just lives down the road. Now, how extraordinary is this? I am born and brought up in Delhi, and it all comes back full circle. Again, a man I've just met. Well, so this particular poem is dedicated to Mary, his aunt. And it's from the book, one of his early books called North, 1975. Part 1 is called Sunlight, and the second poem, the companion poem, is called The Seed Cutters, and I'll read the first. There was a sunlit absence. The helmeted pump in the yard heated its iron. Water honeyed in the slung bucket, and the sun stood like a griddle cooling against the wall of each long afternoon. So her hands scuffled over big board, the reddening stove sent its plaque of heat against her, where she stood in a flowery apron by the window. Now she dusts the board with a goose's wing, now sits broad-lapped with whitened nails and measling shins. Here is a space again, the scone rising to the tick of 2 clocks. And here is love, like a tinsmith's scoop, sunk past its gleam in the meal bin. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in all our delegates' bag, I find this little pencil. And this little pencil has a line engraved from Seamus Heaney, between my finger and my thumb. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. And it's there outside. Liam Neeson read it much better than I could ever do. I don't know whose idea this was, but this was a brilliant thing. And now I'll read one poem of mine, which sort of, in a sense, links up with a lot of the concerns of Irish poetry, which is to do with borders, which is to do with fractured spaces, which is to do with familial spaces, which is to do with dreaming, nostalgia. But this one is set very much in another conflicted area in India. The poem is called Kargil. And Kargil was one of the last big flashpoints. War was fought between India and Pakistan. And I visited Kargil 10 years after the war. I did a big trip from Delhi to Leh, Ladakh, and back, about a month and a half, trekking and rafting and so on. And my son was very, very young then, and Kargil was not part of the itinerary. And of course, he was at a point where he was playing with plastic guns and so on. He says, "Baba, you must go to Kargil because I'll find bullets," and so on. So of course, you never say no to a child. So you go there, and it's a boring outpost of a town, dusty and so on. He felt really guilty and squeamish. We spent a day and moved on. But the amazing thing is what happens to strange people like us who are poets, who end up being completely stirred much later. The poem opens with, and this is another coincidence, many of the Heaney and world poetry scholars may know that the triumvirate of world poetry at one point was Derek Walcott, Joseph Brodsky, and Seamus Heaney, who were great, great friends even before they won the Nobel Prize. And they all won the Nobel Prize eventually. So the poem opens with an epigraph from Derek Walcott's book-length poem called Teopola's Hound, and I quote, "Our street of smoke and fences, gutters gorged with weed and reeking, scorching iron grooves of rusted galvanize, a dialect forged from burning asphalt, and a sky that moves with thunderhead cumuli, grumbling with rain." 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people past, skeletons charred, abandoned brick wood cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost in full throttle, everyday chores sketching outward signs of normalcy and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness, the muezzins cry, the monks chant, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust, smokescreen everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual, diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them, no one knows. And beyond them, no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up and calculate their exact arc and find instead a flawed theorem. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sudeep, Francis, Eric. It's extraordinary how poems travel and make a difference to lives. Heaney said, what you hope is that reading a poem will return you to your own life anew. And I think all these in different ways have done that. I'm going to read the poem that I took the title of this session from. And I just wanted to remind you where he is in his life. He's left the north. He's gone to Wicklow, County Wicklow. He's been writing. He wrote North when he was in Glanmore Cottage. And it's very moving to see the room Glanmore there. And in his poem Kinship, in that extraordinary book North, he takes the bog, this iconic bog, as the source of and as the metaphor for the process of poetry. He says, this is the vowel of earth, dreaming its root in flowers and snow. And he returned to this idea about the vowels later. In 1976, the family moved to Dublin and left the little cottage. But of course, he stayed in it to write. And he celebrated its sort of influence on him in fieldwork in 1979. And the centerpiece of fieldwork is the Glanmore Sonnets. And he says in that lovely book, Stepping Stones, the interviews with him, those 4 years, 76 to 79, were an important growth time when I was asking myself questions about the proper function of poets and poetry and learning a new commitment to the art. I think nobody who's been with us for the last 3/4 of an hour could fail to feel that he did that and has offered us so much in it. And in this first poem, he's using his Latin. He loved Latin. The word verse, versus, comes from the turning of the plough at the end of the furrow. It's a Latin word. Comes from the word to change, to turn. So you turn the plough round at the furrow, and then you come back, and that is your verses. And he's celebrating, I think, his love of the land from which his family came from, his love of language, his own language, and the other languages which lie behind it, and the hope of what is happening now for his life, as well as thinking what is happening in the north, which is left behind in 1979. Vowels ploughed into other, opened ground. The mildest February for 20 years is mist bands over furrows, a deep no sound vulnerable to distant gargling tractors. Our road is steaming. The turned up acres breathe. Now the good life could be to cross a field, and art a paradigm of earth new from the lathe of ploughs. My lea is deeply tilled. Old plough socks gorge the subsoil of each sense, and I am quickened with a redolence of farmland as a dark, unblown rose. Wait then, breasting the mist in sowers' aprons, my ghosts come striding into their spring stations. The dream grain whirls like freakish Easter snows. Perfect sonnet. So I'm going to finish with a little poem of mine, which I seem to have lost. I really have lost it. Hey! Eek. Or maybe it's here. Maybe it's here. Yep, it's here. Okay, when I was here last, it was a very moving occasion for me because my mother had just died. This was 2 years ago, and I couldn't break a commitment to come and read. And I was just overwhelmed with being here, and also earthed by the sense of Heaney and his work, and that life goes on, and poetry, what is poetry for, but as it's for validating your sense of yourself and your going on. And after that, I wrote a book for my mother, and this is a little poem, which is, it's about the book is about mourning. It's about green, which was Seamus Heaney's favorite color, and it's about hope, really, hope beyond pain. And this is called Gory Bay, Jersey, 1933. In sepia, sunbonnet, bleached tartan shorts, standing in a wet Vesuvius of rilling sea and sand, she's an explorer at the summit of a mountain, leading on a knobbled spade. She did tell me she went to Jersey once, saw cabbages so huge that villagers, like mythical inhabitants on a medieval map at the edge of the known world, used the stalks for walking sticks. She's a chorus girl, putting forward a long bare leg, with the tide coming in all round her, a flood of lapping glass set to wreck that sandcastle any minute. She is 14, her face in shadow, gazing, smiling at someone along the beach. Yes, when your mother dies, you lose the key to so many neural pathways. You had it in your hand, and now will never know where it fits the mappa mundi of her life. But when, last year, I found this photo in a box under the bed, she said, "Nice legs. Wish I'd had legs like that." You did. That's you. She didn't believe it, and I can't believe she isn't here to show her this again. So I don't think we have time now for a discussion. I think we're just going to open the floor for you for we've got 5 minutes. Anybody we've got a microphone roving around, and you just said, but that's very confusing. All right. All right, well, in that case, we've got 5 minutes for discussion. Would anybody like to... Would anybody like to discuss anything? Yes. Were you reading The Cure at Troy because you're a playwright as well? Is that?
Each line spoke to me personally, and it's a reflection. To think I'm at the home place of Seamus Heaney, this is overwhelming, and thank you very much. Where's Lindy? Thank you very much for bringing me here, and the JLF Belfast. It's been great. So when I was at Hay Festival, I performed a play, Death on the Third Floor, and it's as if I had read that piece by Seamus. And Death on the Third Floor is a true story. Despite what my father's family did to me, despite what happened to me in Russia, I had 5 attempts at my life. You know, I was taken hostage by 30 Cameroonians, and they tortured me, they mutilated me. At the point of death, they put hot knives and gas cookers, and from my neck to my arms to my knees. I accepted my fate. I wanted to be killed by these strangers than what my father's family did to me. I was developing such bile, such venom. And in this piece, Seamus speaks of forgiveness, encounter with the graves, and eventual redemption, and gods. I never heard the voice of any god. I heard the voice of a goddess, and this goddess was my mother. At the point of death, I wanted to die, but my mother said, "Agbe wolo atimbangundo, agbe wolo atimbangundo we ye oma we anje we." My mom said to me, "Ngalle, if you should allow these guys to kill you in Russia and bury you in a shallow grave, I'm going to come there from Cameroon. I'll dig you out of this grave and kill you again."
Wow. Wow. I mean, I remember that play. You probably have seen it, and I remember it was when it was first done in London, and it was overwhelming because it was. I can't remember what the date of it, but it was in the midst of the troubles and the conflict. And there's Heaney, bringing a Sophocles play about war and being outside war to life, and now it's speaking to this extraordinary thing of yours, Francis.
I think, again, I'm looking at things, I guess, as a translator, and in his translations, I think I'm admiring maybe the way that he keeps to the spirit and the letter of the work, but also to the voice of the work. And maybe I think something I personally could learn from him is maybe letting go with trying to completely reproduce the rhythm, and perhaps, I don't know, finding a voice in English which sort of goes somewhere between English poetry and the voice of the original poet. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it seems to me that it's what we're talking about a bit is love for people, different people, being between different people, and love for the language and the sort of hope of regeneration for the language. Your respect for your Serbian master, and wanting to do him honor in this language. Sudeep.
I think love is the right word, really. I mean, it's a good note to end on, because I was thinking very, very hard how to connect Heaney and India. It was a desperate attempt because there wasn't any connection, obvious connection. But I remember way back in the 80s when I first took a copy of The Hall Lantern had just come out. And I think this was in University of Maryland, where Heaney was giving a reading, and I had to ask a lot of my friends because I couldn't afford the trip. So I had to cross 2 states, and I took this book along. And so he asked me, "So where are you from?" I said, "Delhi." And then what do you say to a man of that stature? Nothing. And then he sort of wrote, "As I pass." And then I said, and at that time I didn't know the poem, so I'm going to just read out the last stanza of that poem, and then it just makes so much sense. It makes sense at the level of intuitive humanity. What he was actually trying to say, though the locale of the poem was very, very English, he wrote this particular poem for his little cousin, his sister's daughter, when she was born. And then Polly Devlin, when Seamus Heaney died, wrote this beautiful, beautiful obituary in The Guardian, dated 14th November 1913. And according to her, she tells Murray tells Seamus that, oh, go on, write a poem, as if you can do it by order. And he wrote this poem, and at some point during the walk with the pram, he saw this little feather, the peacock feather, and I'm just going to read the last stanza. It's from A Peacock's Feather, 1972, and the last stanza is, so before I leave your ordered home, let us pray. May Tilt and Loam, darkened with Celts and Saxons' blood, breastfeed your love of house and wood. And I drop this for you as I pass, like the peacock's feather in the grass. And as it turns out, peacock is our national bird, so he knew that too.
Yes, I just wanted to echo what Sudeep just said about in his last stanza. It's not all gloomy, trust me. In the last stanza, Seamus says, that means someone is hearing the outcry and the bed cry of a new life at its stem. It means once in a lifetime that justice can rise and hope and history can rhyme. In terms of my personal story, I can only express this in Russian language correctly. In Russian language it says, "Смеется хорошо, тем, кто смеется последний." And the closest I can say it in English is, he who laughs last laughs best.
So we have 10 minutes for poems. Well, you can give us poems if you want, but questions. Any questions?
It's interesting to hear Sudeep speculate that there's no connection between India and Hini. And there's certainly no, it's very hard to locate Hini within the mega cities of Delhi and Calcutta. But India, like Ireland, has moved in much less than a century from the village to the city. You know, we are, you know, most of us are city people, but with roots within a single generation in the village. And I think Hini is the connection between the village and the modern world. And I think that is, you know, I would just appreciate your thoughts on that, whether in a sense, is Indian literature making that bridge back to the village, or has it broken the connection with the village and has it become urban?
It's a very, very broad question in the sense Indian literature, when you talk about Indian literature, we have to talk about literatures that are being produced in various languages. And in India, we have 26 official languages and over 10,000 different dialects. And literatures are being produced in all of them. So yes, in many of the other languages, the tradition from the village and the rural and the urban has not been broken. There is a continuum. But I think what most of the Western world is largely in the last, say, 15 years, exposed to English language writing that comes out of India. And in the English language writing scene, I think there is a distance. There is distinctly what is called metropolitan and urban literature, partly because of circumstance, because of education, and so on and so forth. And the rural aspects of writing are also through the lens of an urban protagonist, usually. So in that sense, it's there, but the distance between, because India's gone through the kind of changes, both infrastructurally, technologically, and so on, it's just so dramatic, which you don't see in Ireland, because Ireland was already at a particular level when it comes to sort of infrastructural advancement. So you have the village and you have the city, and then there's the spaces in between, and people went in and out. Sure, what happens is farming has become more mechanized, and when Guinea was writing about sloshing through the mud and so on, that part is not there. But when we talk about Indian literature, yes, of course. I mean, you have wonderful examples in Bengali literature, in Hindi literature, in Urdu literature. The continuum is very, very strong. I mean, you have to recognize that, it's a very, very ancient link. These languages go back so many centuries that it is, you'll be foolish to not acknowledge it. And I will also say something, since we were talking about translation and Francis, who's such a fine translator. I have to admit that I'm a better poet in English because I speak Bengali and Hindi. The registers, the resonances, the textures, the cadence of these languages make my English much better than otherwise I would be a poorer writer, I think.